At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, my daughter-in-law was pounding on my front door and screaming my name so loudly the neighbors came outside to watch. I stood in complete silence behind the curtains while she demanded I let her in. Minutes later, my son arrived carrying a sledgehammer and shouted that he would break the door down if he had to. They thought they owned everything I had. What they did not know was that someone was already inside the house with me. And when the door finally opened, the truth standing behind me changed their lives forever. My name is Margaret, and at 71 years old, I believed I had spent my entire life building something meaningful for my family. My late husband and I worked for decades, saved every dollar we could, and eventually paid off a beautiful home that became the center of every holiday and family gathering. After my husband passed away, I felt lonely, so I leaned heavily on my son Daniel and his wife Rebecca. I trusted them completely because they were family, and I assumed they wanted what was best for me. For several years, everything appeared normal. But slowly I began noticing small changes in the way they treated me whenever money or property became part of the conversation. The first warning signs were subtle enough to ignore. Rebecca constantly asked questions about my will, my savings, and who would inherit the house. Daniel insisted he only wanted to help me manage my finances. But every discussion somehow ended with suggestions about transferring ownership or adding his name to important documents. Whenever I hesitated, they acted offended and reminded me that they were the only family I had left. Their pressure increased so gradually that I almost convinced myself it was coming from a place of love. Deep down, however, something felt wrong, and that feeling became impossible to ignore after an unexpected conversation with my bank manager. One afternoon, the manager privately informed me that several unusual inquiries had been made regarding my accounts. Although no money had been taken, someone seemed extremely interested in understanding how my assets were structured. The information disturbed me because I had never authorized anyone to investigate my finances. Around the same time, I overheard Rebecca speaking on the phone about renovations she planned to make to my home one day. She was describing changes as though the property already belonged to her. For the first time, I seriously considered the possibility that my son and daughter-in-law were waiting for an inheritance rather than caring about me as a person. Determined to learn the truth, I quietly hired a private investigator. I expected reassurance, but what arrived instead shattered my trust completely. Over the next several weeks, evidence revealed that Daniel and Rebecca had been consulting lawyers, discussing ways to gain control of my property, and telling friends that they would soon become owners of the house. The investigator uncovered messages showing they believed I would eventually move into assisted living, allowing them to take possession much sooner than expected. Reading those reports felt like losing my husband all over again. The people I loved most were already planning a future that did not include me. Instead of confronting them immediately, I decided to protect myself first. I updated my legal documents, reviewed every account, strengthened security measures, and changed every lock on the property. Most importantly, I contacted the attorney who had managed my family estate for years and arranged a private meeting. Together, we created a plan that would ensure my wishes were honored and impossible to challenge. A retired judge who is a longtime family friend also agreed to witness the final paperwork. By the time everything was completed, I felt something I had not experienced in months. I felt safe. 3 days later, the storm arrived. At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, Rebecca began pounding on my front door. Her voice echoed through the neighborhood as she demanded to know why her key no longer worked. I remained calm and refused to answer. Soon, Daniel arrived carrying a heavy sledgehammer. Furious and red-faced, he shouted that I had no right to lock them out and accused me of being manipulated by outsiders. Watching from the window, I realized neither of them was concerned about my well-being. Their anger came from losing access to something they believed belonged to them. As their shouting grew louder, a black vehicle pulled into the driveway. Daniel suddenly fell silent when he recognized the person stepping out. It was the attorney handling my estate, accompanied by the retired judge and a uniformed officer. Rebecca immediately changed her tone and tried to act concerned, but the performance was too late. The attorney calmly informed them that all legal arrangements had been finalized and that ownership of the property remained exclusively under my control. He then revealed something neither of them expected. The majority of my estate had been transferred into a charitable trust that would support scholarships and community programs after my passing. The color drained from their faces. Everything they had been counting on vanished in a single moment. Daniel argued, Rebecca cried, and both insisted there had been a misunderstanding. Then the attorney produced copies of messages, recordings, and evidence collected during the investigation. Every excuse collapsed instantly. The people standing in front of my house were forced to confront their own actions in front of witnesses. For the first time, they understood that greed had cost them far more than money. It had destroyed the trust of the person who loved them most. As the meeting ended, I finally opened the door and stepped outside. The neighborhood had gone quiet, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. I looked directly at my son and told him that inheritance can be replaced, but character cannot. I explained that wealth was never the real issue. The issue was that they had stopped seeing me as a mother and started seeing me as an opportunity. Neither of them could meet my eyes. Without another word, they walked away, leaving behind the future they had spent years planning. Months later, life became peaceful again. The charitable trust began helping students pursue education they otherwise could not afford, and I found comfort knowing my savings would create opportunities instead of fueling greed. Daniel eventually reached out with a sincere apology, and while forgiveness took time, accountability came first. Looking back, I realized the greatest lesson was not about money or property. It was about recognizing who truly values you before it is too late. The morning my son arrived with a sledgehammer, he expected to break down a door. Instead, the truth broke down every lie that had been hiding behind a smile. They thought the house was waiting for them. They thought the locks were the problem. They thought the door hid their future. But when that door finally opened, they discovered something far more powerful than an inheritance. They discovered the truth, and the truth left them pale.